Well, hello, James. So good to see you again. And thank you
Hello,
so
Andrew.
much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us for our second virtual Hereward War Games show, hosted by Mike Whitaker of Peterborough War Games Club. We didn't think we'd have to do this again in this format, but here we are. We first got involved with Waterloo Uncovered via the article by Comrade Kinch, and then got drawn into the project. But for the benefit of our members and attendees to past Hereward War Game shows, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm James Cowan. I was a soldier for 30 years. I joined the army in 1982, and then I served in all the obvious places. Actually, I started out in Berlin. My first job was guarding Rudolf Hess, and then he died, nothing to do with me, hopefully. And then the wall came down just as we left. So it was that kind of period. And then I served in Northern Ireland, Africa, Hong Kong, and then latterly in Iraq and Afghanistan. And one of my last jobs in the army, I was responsible for the Olympic security operation in 2012, which was very interesting. And then I left the army in 2015, and I now run an NGO called the Halo Trust, which clears landmines around the world. But I'm involved with Waterloo Uncovered as a trustee. I have a sort of dual interest, really. First of all, as an ex-soldier who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, I do really care about some of the veterans who have perhaps fallen on hard times, not found it easy out of the army. And I think a lot of this is to do with the psychiatric effects of conflict. So I'm very keen to help. And I came across Waterloo Uncovered, and I have a long-standing interest in Waterloo. We can develop that. And it just struck me as an extraordinary idea that you could conduct archaeology on the battlefield of Waterloo with professional archaeologists, but also introduce veterans into it. And they could come out, they could take part in the dig. But what better way to derive therapeutic benefit than spending 2 weeks in the sunshine in the summer in Belgium, in and around Waterloo, with other veterans, thinking about conflict in a previous age, and thereby coming to terms with the effects of present conflict. So that's really how I came to be involved with Waterloo Uncovered.
If we may ask, the charity Waterloo Uncovered seems to have gone from strength to strength. What do you think are the main attractions for contributors and sponsors?
Well, I think it's a really simple idea. And I think people just really like it. You know, it's such a fascinating battle, Waterloo, and people can relate to it. But yet there's so much to still be discovered about it. So it's this dual business of both improving our knowledge of the battlefield, the scholarship surrounding it, but also helping out people that has made people attracted to it. It's also quite accessible. You know, both accessible geographically, people can get to Belgium pretty easily on the Eurostar, but also I think in history, you know, it is extremely well understood as a battle. People have written a lot about it. So there's a lot of information to draw on, but still a great deal more to learn. So I think that's why people have been attracted to it.
And as a professional soldier yourself, what do you think are the special values that it brings to the service veterans who attend Waterloo Uncovered that are perhaps not available elsewhere?
Well, I think it was Clausewitz who said that war has an eternal nature, but a changing character. And of course, conflict is very different from the age of 1815 to the age of 2021. Many things have changed, not least the technology, but there is an eternal nature to it, which I think hasn't changed at all. It's violent, it's intense, it involves two sides desperately trying to win in the face of extreme odds. It involves chance and reason in equal measure. And so that side of it, I think the eternal nature of it is very appealing because you can see and draw parallels from the past to the present. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so interested in it.
So perhaps, James, if we could move on to the Waterloo Uncovered part and the diorama, the building of the battlefield of it, could you tell us a little bit about that and why you wanted to do it?
Well, I think there's a huge amount that's been learned, as I said, about Waterloo, not least by Waterloo Uncovered itself through its archaeology. But perhaps many of your members will be aware of Captain William Sieben. Sieben was a soldier himself. He was not actually at Waterloo, but he was in Belgium in 1815. And he was a cartographer, and he set out to create a diorama, in fact, 2 dioramas of Waterloo in the 1830s. And it really became a sort of obsession for him. And he contacted as many British officers as he could. And he went out to Belgium, and he spent many, many months on the battlefield doing a painstaking survey of the battlefield. And he came back and he made these 2 dioramas in Dublin, actually, one of which is now in the National Army Museum, and the other one is in the Royal Armoury in Leeds. These 2 dioramas are extraordinary achievements because they really brought together a huge amount of research and scholarship into how the battle had been played out. But they did lack, obviously, in one important respect, which was that Sieben was a man of his age. He lived on an island before telegram, certainly before the internet, and he couldn't really easily get hold of French officers or any of the Allied officers who'd served alongside the British in Belgium in 1815. So his account is very British focused. And although it is an exceptional resource upon which we still draw, it did lack in that important regard. And of course, famously, he was slightly, lent on by the Duke of Wellington to downplay the role of the Prussians in the battle. So he could actually have included more information about them, but chose not to. And the result is that the 2 dioramas have a pretty British focus to them. And although I'm a ex-British soldier myself, I do sort of set a great store by objectivity. And one of the great strengths, I think, of Waterloo Uncovered has been its capacity to reach out not just to ex-British servicemen, but to people from other nations, not least the Dutch, the Belgians, the various German nations involved, and the French. And so it's a really genuinely multinational exercise that Waterloo Uncovered has got going. So I thought, couldn't we correct what had happened to Sieben? Couldn't we create a new diorama of Waterloo that takes all the recent scholarship and draws on that kind of international team effort, and also do it at a scale that actually could be seen? One of the problems with the Sieben diorama is the figures are absolutely tiny, and it's situated in quite a dark corner of the National Army Museum. And the one at Leeds is only one small section of the battlefield. So my sort of vision was to create a new diorama that would be in homage to Sieben, but would correct the various mistakes made on the diorama, and would be at a scale we could see it. But the result, of course, is it has to be absolutely enormous, and perhaps a bit more of that in a minute.
Well, yes, if we come on to the enormity of it, if I could just hold up a prop here. I don't know whether that will come across, but this is how we would represent a regiment of or a battalion of French infantry in our war games, about 24 figures arranged on a base there. But James, I mean, your project is just out of this world, really. It's why did you choose such an ambitious figure ratio?
Well, I think, I mean, wargaming is a great sport for those who take part. It's incredibly social. It makes your brain work, but it is ultimately having to be done at a practical scale, and you have to make your units that size, and it's representative, but it can't really actually get at what warfare was really like. I mean, let's take, you've shown us a battalion of infantry, but let's take a battery of artillery. A battery of artillery for wargamers is normally, I think, shown by a single gun, often, perhaps with a limber. But a real battery has, depending on the nation, between 6 and 8 guns. It would have 8 limbers, each drawn probably by between 6 and 8 horses. And then each gun would also be supported by perhaps as many as 2 caissons of ammunition, each drawn by 8 horses. And then if it's a horse battery, each one of the gunners would have their own horse to ride. And then there would be spares wagons. There would be other wagons carrying yet further second line ammunition. And you might have as many as 300 horses in a single battery of artillery. So you can get a sense of scale here, that if you really want to represent the full scale of Napoleonic warfare, you have to do it with these enormous numbers. And I think generalship is what interests me, because on a war game, you can stand there on your table and look from one end of it to the other and at a glance see everything. Of course, once you get to this genuine scale on a horse, on a hill, or even not on a hill, it's very, very hard to see what is actually going on. And even if you can see anything, to pass messages that can be have impact in a timely manner. So this is what interests me, is how do you maneuver in an age before the radio, before the telephone, where you're entirely reliant upon gallopers taking messages around the battlefield. I mean, this really reveals the true genius of people like Napoleon, Wellington, and Blucher. And the mistakes they made, and they did make quite a few mistakes, can then be set in their proper context. And I do sometimes wonder whether the armchair generals who criticized them could really have done any better, given the very difficult circumstances. And of course, add on to that the weather and the tiredness. These were exhausted men, having had no sleep for 4 days, soaked to the bone, and really walking through very knee-deep mud. So I think sometimes that side of it can't be revealed very easily on a war games table.
No, and I completely agree with you. And rule writers have spent many, many hours and years trying to recreate these problems that you've set out, the problems of artillery trains getting in the way, and communication on the battlefield when you're dealing with thousands and thousands of troops. But often we neglect them in wargaming because, yeah, they are problems that are so difficult to recreate. If I could perhaps move on though to what we'd like to know is how the diorama project has progressed during lockdown. It was unforeseen, and that must have curtailed some of your building.
Yeah, well, interestingly, I got going with this project really as me on my own, and I thought I'd done reasonably well, and I suppose I've never actually counted how many figures I've got, but somewhere I think between about 30,000 and 40,000, which is quite a lot. But really, at the rate I was going, it was going to take me over 100 years to finish the project, so that was clearly not going to work. And then it was suggested to me by the CEO of Waterloo Uncovered, Mark Evans, perhaps I could just reach out to people. Some of the people in Waterloo Uncovered who are helped by the project could derive some therapeutic benefit from it, but also to a much broader section of people in wargame societies, or just modelers and collectors, enthusiasts of one sort or another. And I thought, well, could this work? And I was thinking, how could we align different styles? How would I know whether these people could meet the required standard? I couldn't meet them. And of course, COVID struck, and I thought this will be even harder now. But actually, in a way, COVID has turned into something of a blessing, because we all know that COVID has arrived at the same moment as the Zoom revolution, and people are spending a lot more time at home. And what it's been is a fantastic way of recruiting people. So I've now got over 70 people helping out, and very few of us have actually ever met. We talk to each other by email or on WhatsApp or by Zoom, and it's just become a sort of community of enthusiasts sharing information, urging each other on, and I'm humbled by the degree of talent and enthusiasm for the projects out there. It's been absolutely fantastic to behold. And I mean, my problem now is just the numbers coming in. I mean, my job's moved from being a private sort of collector and painter to being someone who's having to get all these figures onto the diorama, making sure they're done properly and in the right place, and just keeping up is really quite an effort. But it's absolutely fantastic, and I'm so grateful to everyone who's involved.
That sounds like you are simulating the problems that Wellington had in real life, isn't it?
Yeah.
James, we heard that you're going to put on an exhibition at the National Army Museum in October. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, the Sieben model, well, the bigger one of the two, is in the National Army Museum, and it struck me that it'd be the obvious and most appropriate place for our diorama would be to go there. The problem with the National Army Museum is it's actually quite a limited, tight space in Chelsea. So I knew they couldn't have the whole thing, and we're not ready anyway for the whole thing. It's going to take some years to get to it. So I thought, well, let's go with the corners of the battlefield. So we're going to display Hougoumont, La Belle Alliance, Plancenoit, Papelotte, and La Haye Sainte. And these in themselves are, quite sizable sections of the battlefield. And of course, you'll be aware that that's where the main buildings of the battle are. So it's going to be a really interesting display of these corners. And of course, Plancenoit is the one place that Sieben did not particularly focus on. We're doing it in conjunction not only with the National Army Museum, but with the Royal United Services Institute, which is actually where Sieben's diorama was originally displayed, and with the Royal Hospital Chelsea. We're going to do it over several days in the week beginning the 22nd of October, and we're going to be putting out shortly invitations, and there are going to be 3 days of lectures and display time, and all members of the club and their friends and anyone else who'd like to come very much invited. It would be a great pleasure to meet some of you for real, and if anybody would like to come and see the diorama, I do hope it will meet with your expectations to see it for real rather than online. And then in subsequent years, we're going to show new sections of the battlefield. So in 2022, we hope to display the main French cavalry charges and obviously the British squares, so perhaps the most famous aspect of the battle. So this year is almost a taster for what will come in subsequent years.
James, it sounds like you're spoiling us, aren't you? And it just sounds a fantastic project and model. Thank you very much for the invitation to come down. I'm sure several of us will be traveling down to see the exhibition. And if we do, because we've been helping to paint one of the regiments, the 72nd French Regiment, whereabouts should we look on the model to see it?
Well, the 72nd were part of Rail's Corps, part of Bachelot's division. And for those who know their Waterloo, they'll know that Rail's Corps was committed to the assault on Hougoumont. But famously, Rail had a sort of a cuckoo in his nest, so to speak. Prince Jerome, Napoleon's youngest brother, who was a difficult character and a young man, not especially well versed in matters to do with war, being given the job as a divisional commander by his brother, the emperor. And Jerome got really carried away and drew his division into assaulting Hougoumont. But the other two divisional commanders, General Foy and General Bachelot, were very much more experienced officers and were more circumspect. So Bachelot kept his division to the east of Hougoumont, where it was committed into the Great Orchard and the field system just to the east of Hougoumont, and then swung north towards the end of the battle into the assault there. So to answer your question directly, the regiment will be situated just southeast of Hougoumont for this diorama, which is shown at 1800 hours on the evening of the 18th of June, 1815.
I suppose one of the questions is, although you've got perhaps 70 people painting and modelling for you at the moment, is there room for any more to join?
There absolutely is. I keep a spreadsheet of all the units at Waterloo. 72,000 French, 64,000 British and Allies, and about 40,000 of Blucher's army committed to Waterloo. So that's a lot of figures to paint. And although we're doing incredibly well, there's still a lot of units that are still free to be painted. So if there's anyone in the club, or if you have any other friends who would like to join this project and be part of something that will be a kind of lasting testimony, and be part of a museum piece forevermore, you'd be very welcome to join us.
That's great. Well, thanks very much for that, James. Now, we have just one more question for you. So how can I phrase this? And we couldn't think of anybody else more qualified actually to reply to this. If you were Napoleon on the morning of the 15th of June, 1815, what are the 3 things that you would have done differently?
Wow, that's a good question. So remember, you've chosen very carefully the date. You haven't said the morning of the 18th or the morning of the 17th or the morning of the 16th. And for those who don't know Waterloo so well, the 18th is obviously the morning of Waterloo, by which point it's very difficult for Napoleon to do anything differently. The morning of the 17th, he could have done quite a few things differently. He could have pursued Wellington with more vigor than he did, and he could have stopped Grouchy from heading off on a wild goose chase. And the morning of the 16th, he could have given clear orders to General d'Erlon, who spent the day shuttling between the battlefield of Quatre Bras and Ligny. And if he had got d'Erlon more decisively committed at Ligny, he could have defeated Blucher completely rather than partially. So, to your question, the morning of the 15th. Well, this, of course, is the day before Ligny and Quatre Bras. And with the benefit of hindsight, we know that the Prussians were the army that was nearest to Napoleon and in greater strength. Of course, before that, Napoleon had calculated that Blucher would be further north and therefore further to the rear, and that he would encounter Wellington first. So that mistake, if we know that fact, he could have committed more decisively to the defeat of Blucher, and he could have given much clearer orders to Ney to conduct a delaying operation at Quatre Bras, to seize the Quatre Bras crossroads and to stop Wellington from intervening decisively with what was happening at Ligny. So I think on the morning of the 15th, the campaign was there to be won. Napoleon had the advantage. He'd managed to concentrate his army in northern France without really being identified. He did manage to catch both Wellington and Blucher by surprise. And if he had then followed through, I think he would have seen the campaign go his way. He had some other problems, though, not least the fact that the lead divisional commander of the lead corps was a royalist and defected. And I think if he'd had more time to think more carefully about some of the commanders he appointed, he might have made some different decisions. But then this is all with the benefit and wisdom of hindsight. And I think it's pretty remarkable that from returning from Elba in March 1815 to deploying in June 1815, he had assembled an army of the scale that he did and managed to achieve all that he managed in that short period of time.
Thank you. Well, that was a much more comprehensive answer than I thought that you would give, James. So thank you so much indeed for that. And that's a wonderful insight from somebody who obviously knows Waterloo and the campaign inside out. Thank you. That was great. I thought actually that you might have said, well, stay in bed, turn around and go back to Paris, but no, you didn't. So thank you very much indeed. So I think our time is up, and it just leaves me really to thank you on behalf of the Peterborough War Games Club and Mike Whitaker for your time. We know you're very busy, and you've always got a very large amount of projects on your schedule. So we just want to wish you well and look forward to meeting you in October at the National Army Museum in London. So thank you very much indeed, James Cowan.
Andrew, thank you.